evening, our dear friends. Greetings from Tuscany and from Los Angeles, California. Dear Alexander, hello. How are you?
I'm doing really well today. How are you doing?
Excellent. Today, our conversation is steering into the direction of relocation, astrocartography, being nostalgic about the places where we used to live and the countries that we used to visit. And our crystal talk today is about moving on, the ability to move on and actually create new and bright and brilliant life. Alexander?
I have been really into the awareness of how one creates nostalgia and fantasy about places that they are presently living in, or places that they want to go to and are afraid of leaving that place because of the fantasy or the illusion that has broken down of that place. You know, Los Angeles is a very interesting place. The actual name of this city in Spanish is the City of the Queen of the Angels, right? So Los Angeles is a woman.
Mm,
And
mhm.
she has a energetic frequency that is been depleted by a lot of people. And what has happened with Los Angeles is because of certain people that have come into power and other individuals that have come into power, it has affected the entire population, the land, the energetic frequency of the land. And for the past like 2 years, I've just been feeling this uh, pull to go, like to say adios, you know, and to possibly have a place here and to bounce between here and another place. But what happened to me when I started to even be in the awareness of that, I felt something tugging at me to pull me back in, right? And with the work of my own energetic clearing process that I've developed over the past 10 years called DVM, which is Dragon Vein Meditation, and also working with Mary, we were able to release the contracts to keep me in this place, right? So now I am very excited to finally leave. So, Mary, what do you have to say around this subject?
Alexander, let's talk about contracts. Let's imagine that someone just, turned on his YouTube channel and is seeing Alexander talk about contracts. And maybe some people are thinking about, you signing a lease or you buying a condo in LA and therefore not being able to leave the place. What do we actually mean by contracts is that what Alexander just mentioned is that we all have contracts, not only the contracts that are written on paper and are filed with our employers, God forbid, or with, let's say, a real estate company, contracts in terms of people saying, I will be back. People saying, in one lifetime, I will come back here and will make sure that everything will be destroyed, like this village or this city will be destroyed. Or I will come back here to re-experience the pain and the suffering again and again because I did not understand the lesson that was behind it.
Hmm.
I will come back here to find the love of my life. This is the place where I always want to be, says a person back in the days, and then wonders why in this lifetime he comes back again and again to this horrible place. Let's imagine some suburbia in Poland or Ukraine or Russia or God knows where, right? So this is the promise that we have given at certain point to ourselves, a commitment that we might have forgotten, but is still working. And let's explain to our audience, Alexander, how this actually works. What is a contract? What is an oath? What is a vow? And what is, let's say, a curse to stay in one particular place?
What is a contract? What is a vow? And what is a curse to stay in one particular place? Is that
Mm-hmm.
correct?
Yes.
I will give you an example.
Yes, please.
I know for a fact that I had many past lives connected to mystery schools, schools of spirituality, the Order of the Golden Dawn, and a lot of these spirituality schools or even cults were all located in Los Angeles, right? So much to the
Mm-hmm.
extent of that last year, I stayed in a place that I thought was just like a farm, and it actually ended up being a place that was a cult where this man said that he was immortal, and so one of his followers actually glued dynamite to themselves to explode his body, right? Um,
Oh.
and actually saw the spirit of this person on the land. And he literally said to me, word for word, he said, "You have 2 weeks to get out of here before I start fucking shit up." And so when a spirit says that to a medium, it's time to go, right? Um, and so there are many
Mm-hmm.
spirits and people from past lives that go back to the same location to break the pattern, to break the curse.
Mm-hmm.
And curses are essentially just patterns of different lifetimes that people haven't broke out of. And so I started seeing this repeated pattern of not having a place to live, not being able to trust women, not being able to allow myself to either live alone or live with someone who isn't constantly trying to get something out of me, right? And so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that is a vow, that is a curse, that is an attachment, right? Which is also a belief system connected to your patriarchal matriarchal lineage. So it is very deep, right? And we can break these vows, oaths, curses, attachments by doing spirit work with someone like you or myself or both of us together. But really, at the end of the day, it's about choosing to break out of the pattern. That's the real energetic shift.
Wow. As always with you, we're diving straight into the depth of wisdom. We don't really have a little social conversation around this, you know. And this
Mm,
is, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, it's Mercury in Sagittarius and in Pisces. According to classical Western astrology, Mercury in Pisces or Sagittarius is in its exile. So
mm,
these people are having difficulties usually with Mercury energy. However, you can see that sometimes exile, planetary um, exile in a specific sign can yield great results. And here we are just diving straight into the depth, the issue of the
mhm,
subject. Well, let me share with you, Alexander, and with our audience something that's been happening recently over the past, let's say, few weeks. This is an example, a sad example, and yet very touching example of a person being attached to one specific place and being oblivious to the fact that this place does not serve her. It's a story about a woman, a young woman. This young female moved to Germany, actually to the city where I used to live for many years, Frankfurt, Frankfurt am Main. And it happened to be that she's highly educated, speaks about 6 languages, traveled the world, and somehow she decided to stay in Frankfurt.
Mm.
Um, no happy sexual life, no private life, work, 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 a lot of stress, disease, to the point where she got so exhausted that she started having psychosomatic effect on her body that resulted in cancer. Cancer stage 4, we're talking about.
Mhm.
And well, she's alive and well right now. But when we actually worked with her, we found out that her ancestors died literally in Germany. And the ones who did not die in Germany died from the hands of the Germans in St. Petersburg. The notorious blockade of Leningrad was happening in the 40s, where people were left to starve for months and months without food because the Germans surrounded the city and were on purpose not letting any of the trains to go through with food and aid. So people were not getting any assistance. They were left out there to die, like, stray dogs or just like animals.
Mm.
And imagine this. So the person arrives to Germany back in 2012, starts working there, learns the language. I'm not sure, or maybe she knew already the language before she came because she speaks like French, Italian, German perfectly. And what triggered her disease is the response of her immune system. So every time she would hear the German speech, the German language, cortisol, noradrenaline, and adrenaline will be released in the body
Yeah.
from the adrenal glands, right? And this is the kind of stress this person was exposed to for over a decade, which obviously had its result. And I realized that she's not the only case, and there are a lot of people who come back inadvertently. They feel drawn to a specific area because there is something unresolved there, either from their ancestors or from their past life. There's something that is there that happened where they have made themselves a promise, like, I'm going to come back and I'm going to solve this issue. So now, question for you, Alexander, and I know that you have clients who travel a lot. You have clients who are actually quite the opposite, who want to stay in one place and don't want to move, or who are attached to their house, little house, and they don't see anything outside of that. What is your take on this stubbornness of either returning back to difficult places and exposing himself or herself to, these unfortunate circumstances, situations, or um, just, quite the opposite, trying to steer away from the difficulty and not looking into the eyes of the challenge, so to say.
Ooh, the eyes of the challenge. Ooh, I love what you just said. Am I staring into the eyes of the challenge right now?
No, you're pretty comfortable where you are.
I have a very layered answer to give you, and I appreciate the story that you just gave us to reflect upon. So it's a mix. So it's a mix of avoiding your present life and your future life. And then the other layer that's beneath it is there's a part of us, and this is going to be very uncomfortable for people to hear, but it's necessary. There's a part of us that enjoys it. There is a part of us in the past or in the present, or maybe it's generational, that we enjoy being slaves to something. And it doesn't have to be a person necessarily. you know? It could be a person, a place, or an institution. So like whenever I'm doing my energy clearings like on clients or people are seeing things on Instagram and I say person, place, or institution, it's because it's the layer that's happening, right? So for example, my mother is always asking me to come back to Virginia. Why do I not have the desire to go back to Virginia? The reason why, Mary, is that I went back to Virginia. I did an extensive amount of DVM on the land, generational curses, cleared a lot of stuff out from my mom, my dad, my brothers, the land, the family that built the town that I came from, and I was done. So it's like I don't have, my body doesn't feel the awareness to go back. See what I mean? Um, but I avoided it for a long time. I avoided going back home. I avoided going back home to Virginia because I knew that if I went back, it would change my entire reality. Now, for some people, it's the opposite of that. They need to leave their hometown. They need to leave the confines of their, what I would call complacency, right? And to go into that
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortability. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
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 Mm-hmm. Yes, you're absolutely right, especially if they're karmic nodes, north node, if we talk about Western astrology, is in the sign of Sagittarius or is in the ninth house or the 12th house. Um, or, for example, if the cusp of the fourth house is once again in the sign of Sagittarius or Aquarius, for example, very often, or even Pisces, very often they end up living abroad or living far away from the place where they were born. And this is the right thing to do. Although a lot of times people have a resistance, they're literally resisting to what's written in the stars. Where do you think this resistance comes from nowadays?
I have I have such a long answer for that
Go
because
ahead.
I am a Pisces with a Sagittarius moon and I have Aquarius in my chart. So like it's so Mary Mary knows, but our audience doesn't know that this whole meeting of the minds is a
Mm.
lifetime's work of culmination happening. Um, anyway, I'm holding pyrite right now to talk about this. Um, um, so uh I have always known that it is time for me to go back to Europe. I have been told by Mary, I have been told by other psychics my whole life, like, hey, it's time for you to go back to your homeland and reclaim your sovereignty. Um, and I did go when I was 13 years old. Well, I was 12, actually 12, 13 years old. And I wasn't really able to enjoy it because I was a child, and I didn't really understand what was happening. I wasn't really inviting the energy of awareness. I was more like, I want ice cream, which to be fair, I'm probably going to say that when I'm there too, just in a different way. Um, and I know, and in my knowing, right, that once I go there, my whole life is going to change, and that the energy of the land is going to imbue into me, and that the energy of people that want to be generous and loving and supportive to me are going to fill up my body. That's going to be different from being in LA and, just being in LA. So it's like being in LA, Italy, being in LA, Italy. And it's like that's the energetic frequency is like an isosceles triangle, like exploding, that's what I want for myself.
Oh, well, speaking of Europe, I mean, one doesn't have to stay there forever, because we know that due to the planetary, let's say, constellations that are coming up, we will probably have a big war in Europe coming up
Yeah.
very soon. And Europe has proven to be the most dangerous place on Earth over the last century, the last 100 years. And I mean, we just celebrated 80-year anniversary of victory, right, over
Yeah.
the Nazis. Um, but unfortunately, mm, Mars Pluto constellation together with Saturn returns in a wicked way, shows up in a chart again, but somewhat reversed.
Yeah.
And we can all think of Elon Musk doing the Roman hello. We can think of the Nazi Ukrainian dude being cheered and greeted in the Canadian Parliament just recently, a few months ago. We can think of, let's say, certain movements in Germany and Eastern Europe, especially, that are, in German, there's this word, Rechtspopulisten. All right. There are a lot of people steering in that direction, and also it's being supported astrologically from
Hmm.
all of the planetary alignments that we see right now, right? Because we have a lot of planets moving out of Pisces and entering Aries. I'll see a lot of dynamic, a lot of shift movement that was predicted actually by you and me when we analyzed it back in 2019, I believe we talked about
Hmm.
it. So
Hmm.
it's not really new. And in these uncertain times, one has to really assess where he or she can live peacefully, right?
Right.
And also when it comes to acquiring property, for example, I know people who've been trying to buy property in Portugal or buy property in Spain, only to find out that their Venus line on the descendant is going directly through Virginia, the United States of America. And this is where they acquired their property easily, just like this, within a few minutes, literally, instead of, beating around the bush and trying to open the door that's been closed and will be closed forever, just because their relocation chart or their astrocartography is not really matching, not really showing that they can have a house there. So all of these things can be checked and verified, and actually give us a lot of information on where one can live and for how long. I remember I suggested I had a client actually from Poland, an elderly gentleman. Um, and he's quite famous in the area of Feng Shui. And I said to him, "Hey, look, you've got your Saturn line moving, sweeping through Tuscany right now, through Italy, through Europe. You better move. You better go somewhere else." He didn't believe me, and he stayed. Not only his relationship fell apart, his health suffered tremendously. And only after he left the area that was affected by this Saturn, the progressive Saturn, he was able to restore his health and also his finances.
Wow.
Unfortunately, his personal life suffered such a damage that he is still recovering. But we are capable of avoiding such adventures in quotation marks. And you spoke earlier about masochistic behavior. You said that we stay in places that do not serve us partially due to the fact that we freaking enjoy the suffering and the pain. So, would you like to elaborate on this a little bit? Why does this happen? What have you seen with your clients in your own life? What triggers this mechanism? What makes it tick?
Well, that is also a layered issue, actually. Hold on one second. That is a layered issue.
Hmm.
So part of that comes from the idealization of the mother and the father and wanting to be a good boy or a bad boy or a good girl and a bad girl. And then a lot of people have guilt and shame around doing what they want to do because they are seeking the approval of their parents through other people. So a lot of people, a lot of people create the necessity to seek sadism and masochism and abuse through others to distract them from their path. They also seek the necessity to create competition with others and to receive competition as well, because it's easier. It takes a lot more energy to create judgment than it does to have clarity. And so there's like this, the most simplest way that I can explain it to our audience and also for myself, because I want to understand this, is that people use their emotional highs and their emotional lows as fuel to propel themselves forward rather than the balanced, centered energy other than the mania. And that's a lot of people in the United States. It's a lot of people in the world because now we romanticize mania. We romanticize mental illness. We do not teach people to modulate the frequency of their mental illness. We teach them to romanticize it. And that's big.
Oh, oh, wow. Absolutely true. Very true. And actually, we have a certain similarity in planetary constellations to 1920s currently. The planets that will be moving into certain signs by the middle of summer of 2025
Mm,
do remind us of 1920s when
mm,
it was in fashion to, let's say, faint or to write poetry or to throw your engagement ring into the river, etc., etc., right? So, yes, drama is the new sexy. Yes, absolutely. And unfortunately, it will continue to be. So, mm, I
mm.
agree.
And
Hmm.
it's up to us to stand in our truth and to receive the energy of our truth. And so our audience is probably wondering why I keep putting the pyrite to the screen. And that's because out of all of the crystals that I have, come across in my lifetime, and I've come across many, it's this one, pink tourmaline and smoky quartz. For whatever reason, it's just what resonates. I remember at one point in my life, I possessed a beautiful specimen that was given to me by Mary and was unfortunately stolen by someone. And that piece really kept me centered, right? And I feel the same kind of energy with this pyrite too. Um, and I think it's important to stand in our truth and in our sovereignty, and again, to stay balanced in our truth and centered. Because if we're not centered and we're not balanced, we're getting sucked into everyone else's reality all the time. And I believe that
Hmm.
the healthy
Hmm.
way, the solution to help our audience moving forward is to do everything that they can to stay in a place where they don't feel stuck in this windstorm constantly. And to trust where they need to go, and also to take a leap. A lot of us are afraid of taking that leap. We come up with excuses. I don't have the money. I don't have the resources. Like, I don't have a husband. I don't have a wife. I don't. What the fuck does that have to do with you going to Japan or Europe or Iceland or wherever? Like, you should just go. And another part of that is that's our brain
Hmm.
also
Hmm.
trying to protect itself from what we consider a threat, and that threat is just the unknown. It's like the Fool card in tarot, which is also the symbol for Pisces.
Well, wow, this is beautiful, Alexander. Whatever you're saying right now is definitely influenced by this mineral that you're holding in your hand, because I feel that shifted the energy and probably our audience as well. I do have pyrite with me tonight, and it's about, what time is it? Yeah, it's 10 o'clock at night, and also this golden, beautiful white wine that I just bought from a very special vineyard here, um, in this Montepulciano region. Who knows what I'm talking about. And I feel totally moved by what you just said, which actually reminds me of one more story that I should tell. When we want to relocate, we want to look at astrocartography, and we want to build a relocation chart for this particular place that we're interested in, because these are two totally different things. Astrocartography is just the planetary projection onto the surface of Earth, and relocation is what your chart would look like after you get your registration, after you get your driver's license, after you get your residency card in this or the other place. As soon as you are there, physically present, and you live in an apartment or in a house for, let's say, longer than 9 months, 9 months or a year, uh, your relocation chart kicks in. Sometimes
Right,
it starts even sooner than that.
right.
And I just witnessed one very interesting story. My client just called me this evening, and she said, "Well, Mary, I got my residency card for Portugal in 2 months, which is usually a nonsense. You would have to wait at least a year or 2 years to get that." Plus, she is Russian. And currently, due to the political situation, it's extremely difficult to get for Russians anything. They cannot even open a bank account in Europe. We're not even talking about residency card. But in this particular case, her beneficial for her planets, such as Jupiter, they were in the so-called seventh house, which means that a lot of positive people, people who are interested in her development, potential partners, people who are willing to share, let's say, time with her, money, whatever else, generous people, are being attracted in this particular area in Portugal. They're being attracted to her, right? They just come by themselves. Jupiter energy and well-positioned Saturn also will give you documents right away if you have it in specific combination with Mercury. So we calculated that out of all of the countries where she can potentially live, because she has business that can be done online, very successful business, we picked Portugal, and she just
Yeah.
moved there without any hesitation, learned the language, and got her documents right away. So, well calculated astrocartography plus relocation can really show a person where he or she can truly reach their full potential,
Right.
truly develop themselves, and finally meet that partner that they have been looking for.
Mm.
I see a lot of times with women, especially, mm, if they're looking for someone, and I don't know how they do it. Like, I personally would not be able to do it, but they go on um, dating apps, right, and meet people again and again and again, and just start getting very insecure in themselves, because
Mhm.
every time they meet someone who is absolutely terrible or treats them very badly. And I remember one story where a girl from Washington, D.C., actually, well, she's from Richmond, she's from Virginia, but worked in D.C., moved to Colorado. She moved to Boulder, Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And her dating life was not going anywhere. It was just absolutely terrible. And actually, what she did is she moved her Venus, the planet Venus, from her first house from way back in the days when she lived in Washington, D.C., and was visible and was dating great guys who were proposing to her. She moved to Colorado, which is officially, probably, supposedly a place full of very fine gentlemen, right? I mean, have you heard this, or is it a myth? Or are you
No, I've
laughing?
heard of it. I've heard of it. I've heard of it. Keep
Yeah.
going.
Well,
It's the
I
it's
guess
the
it's a myth.
pyrite.
Yeah, I guess it's a myth. And so she started living in this place in Colorado, and she was dating these guys. She's got a great resume, perfect marriage material, but she was not finding anyone. And I looked at her chart and I said, "Girl, your Venus moved actually to the 12th house, which makes you invisible as a female."
Oh,
Yes, you can go to a psychotherapist. Yes, you can work on your feminine energy. Yes, you can do whatever. But at the end of the day, all of the men who see you, they want to shift you, move you into the box, which is labeled a lover, right?
uh,
Just or a one night stand or long distance relationship. They're not interested in building a meaningful connection with you.
ah, yeah.
This is the power of the 12th house.
Hmm.
So we need to be mindful of where we live. And when we move across the country, and obviously a lot of Americans move around, we need to be mindful of how this particular place influences us in our love life, for example.
Right.
Hmm.
Oh, wow,
Yeah.
Mary, you're so full of wisdom. I really love it. So I could listen to you talk for hours, honestly. Um, I have a question
What
for
about
you.
Colorado? What do you know about Colorado? No, let's bring some humor into our crystal talk tonight.
Well, I know that Colorado energetically is a powerhouse for ley lines because of the crystal formations that are underneath the ground there. So a lot of people end up moving to Colorado, especially from Los Angeles. There's a lot of transplants that move there. Um,
Mhm.
a lot of people actually come from Colorado to LA or vice versa. Um, and
Mhm.
I think it's very interesting. There's another thing I wanted to say too, in that some people have a lot of luck with dating apps and some people do not. So I think that's also based on people's chart as well. Like, for example, I have a lot of Saturn. I have a lot of Saturn, and I also have a lot. I have why my Aquarius is in what is it? Venus. My yeah, my what is it? Venus and Mercury are in Aquarius, right? So whenever I interact with people online on dating apps, it can come across as very cold unless I'm speaking in a voice note, right? And I do
Mhm.
find that a lot of text exchanges between people usually don't end up to anything. Like you could be talking to someone else on a dating app and they say, "Sorry, we're not a match." And it's like, no, neither of us know whether we are a match or not based off of a text. Although I know if we're a match or not based off of reading the energy of your photo. um, um, yeah.
You're a dangerous character,
Am I?
Alexander.
That's
Uh,
that's that's the rumor I heard.
mhm.
Well,
Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
the other thing that I have to be mindful of is that I have the gift of compassion and wisdom, which can be very, very enchanting to people. You know, when they see me, they go, ah. look at it, and I'm like, no, baby girl, like this enchantment is to help your barriers come down so that I can facilitate you through your trauma and your issue and your triggers. And there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that gift. And so um, I am realizing now and coming into the awareness of that people do not get the same access that they get or used to get from me. And that's very powerful, but it also elevates my standards for the type of person that I want to date and the husband that I am manifesting into my life currently.
Mm-hmm. 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 Well, how should we finish that? How should we round that up? I cannot promise you anything once you come to Italy, but there are quite a few very interesting fine gentlemen here, and I'm pretty sure that they still keep up the tradition of the Roman Empire. So we'll see. Um, as far as dating apps, I personally never had the chance to experience that, but I know for sure that people whose Mars is in exile, people who have the so-called weak Mars, um, people with Mars in Taurus, or people with the Mars in Libra, right? These are the two signs governed by Venus. People with this weak Mars are not willing to put their picture on the app, create a dating profile, because they want to have, let's say, a hands-on experience. They want to meet people personally. They want to see them. All of the digital acquaintances are, let's say, somewhat foreign to them. So they try to steer away from it. With the same success, people with Mars and Taurus or Libra would rather build, let's say, a table than buying it in some furniture store, right? So
Right.
they're very hands-on. And maybe it's not a surprise for our audience, but my Mars is in the sign of Libra. And this makes me to be very crafty, right? So I paint, I had personal exhibitions in many different cities in the United States and also in Europe. I also knit, I also like to make my own like sweaters and stuff. And this looks weird. It sounds weird. But somehow when I look at people with Mars in exile, I find them mm, very intriguing, right? Because they require a special approach
Mm-hmm.
and they do succeed at the end of the day. Once they let their healthy aggression, let's put it this way, healthy aggression to come forth, to come through. Now, let's talk about the mm, attempt that a lot of people are going through right now to subdue, to suppress their own aggression.
Oh my God.
After the fires that happened in California and Gavin Newsom,
Mm-hmm.
was throwing money at people. And well, you better tell the story. I mean, because you were there and you know it firsthand. I'm just as an astrologer, I can just say that he's got a very shitty natal chart, and his natal chart affects the entire state of California. That's the only thing I can say.
Well, this is you are accessing a topic that I have been talking about for a while now. So a lot of people are caught in the crossfire of defending the public personas and being against the public personas. There's a lot of things that happened where a lot of people's houses burned down, a lot of people lost their homes, a lot of people's animals died. There were people that died. There was a lot of stuff that happened that they're still not showing on the news, that the rebuilding process that they're doing. I mean, there's a lot of areas of the beaches surrounding where a lot of sea life is dying and
Mhm.
showing up on the shore. Dolphins, sea lions, like, um and they're is a okay, I'll say it. The
Mm.
rebuilding process is actually to turn Los Angeles into a smart city. And with that, there is a sort of cleansing process that happened. And um, it's kind of like up to everyone if they want to go through this sort of handmaid's tale type of living situation, or if they want to start choosing to live in a community-based living situation where people are supporting each other and helping each other. But the problem with that is that because there are so many people that are displaced and have gone through hell on earth, they have a lot of anger, they have a lot of
Mhm.
suppressed anger. They have a lot of aggression that already existed before the fires, that already existed before their houses burned down and all of these other things. And so now there's a lot of people trying to rebuild their lives that can't get centered, that can't get grounded, and rightfully so. But you have
Mhm.
to ask the question at a certain point again of like, are you trying to recreate the fantasy of what you once had, or is it time to leave? And that's a very uncomfortable question to ask to someone who's lost their entire existence. But then you have to also ask the question of why was your life of living in California and living in an area that is ridiculously expensive and
Mhm.
stressful? What is holding you here exactly? Is it really helping you? Is it really rejuvenating your body? You know, and that's a question that people are really afraid to ask themselves. I believe
Mhm.
that uh, the relocation process for a lot of people has been incredibly difficult, especially if people have like families and things like that. But again, this process has been used to farm the emotional intensities of other people. And
Wow.
the aggression and suppression and explosive mania that it creates in people is like food to these leaders and
Mhm.
politicians and entities
Mhm.
inside of
Mhm.
these politicians. Anyway, what do
Mhm.
you think about all that, Mary?
Well, I personally just moved out of the most fancy area of Frankfurt
Mm-hmm.
recently, and I can say that usually narcissists are drawn to the most expensive, the most exclusive, the most prestigious areas of
Sure,
town, right?
sure.
And the specific area where you live, it's the creme de la creme of all of the narcissism, if I may say this.
Yes, yes,
And definitely when you part with some of the artifacts, with some of the attributes of what you used to define yourself through, it's very painful.
yes,
So I think that some of the people who are still attached, and as you rightfully said, Alexander, still fantasize about how great their place is, although you can just see one burnt down tree and an empty field. There is still this fantasy. It's the stubbornness with which people want to remain in the past.
yep,
Um, and it's just very sad.
yeah.
That's all I can
And
say. Yeah.
thank you for saying that. That's very interesting you bring that up. And it's interesting too because what happens with a lot of narcissists as well is it's all about avoidance, right? And so when you have
Mhm.
a cluster of hundreds of thousands of people that are narcissists or covert narcissists or people who were abused by narcissists that have narcissistic traits, it's like a cauldron of avoidance, right?
Wow.
And
Yeah.
the more you avoid your anger, the more you avoid who you truly are and your authenticity, it manifests as disease, it manifests as neurological problems, like, and so that's
Mm-hmm.
why a lot of people, well, the audience doesn't really know this, but the reason why I'm bringing this up is a long time ago, Mary and I, we I used to call Mary from the bathtub, and I used to put different crystals in the bathtub. And this is before I knew whether the crystals were toxic in water or not. So I may or may not have poisoned myself once or twice. Um, but one time I was sitting in the bathtub with the smoky quartz, and Mary and I essentially prophesized a lot of things that were about to happen. And she was saying, Alexander, what are you seeing? And I saw that if people didn't start working on themselves during the pandemic, if they resisted against working on themselves during the pandemic and were just waiting for things to get better, 4 or 5 years later, they would all start dropping like flies and dying. And part of this is the resistance to the influence of Saturn. It is when people are
Mm-hmm.
resistant against death and rebirth cycles and they want to stay in complacency, right? And so now that is why you are seeing the death of the narcissist. You are seeing the death of the narcissist mind, the illusion that we have been sold by Hollywood, the illusion that we've been sold by the United States in general, that we need to have this illusionary life to be happy. And that's not to say that I want to also tell our audience that luxury is important because you need to learn how to receive, but you are not
Mm-hmm.
owned by money. Money does not own you. Money is an energy. Money is a navigational tool to navigate this reality. It is not the end all be all of everything. And for a lot of narcissists, it's their main focus and goal and motivation. So,
I was just about to say, try to save this money. You know, money are not important. It's not everything. Um, try to say it to a person who got stuck in the anal stage of development, right? It's very difficult to shift this reality towards, lesser importance of money, so to say. Yeah, but you're absolutely right. Now, for the next 600 years, starting from July 2025, we will have a lot of planets dancing around and moving in and out of the air signs, which means that the currency that we will have will look different. Not, it's not going to be gold. It's not going to be something that we were used to since the last 600 years, right? Since the time when the first bank was open, just right around the corner here in Siena, in Tuscany.
mm,
This narrative will shift into the field of information and
mhm,
intelligence. How intelligent are you? How many languages do you speak?
mhm,
Can you use your brain, not ChatGPT? Can you actually use your brain
mhm,
to comprehend a complex issue and give, let's say, a few conclusions or maybe advices, that
mhm.
result from you understanding the material. So all of this will become the foundation and the ground for the new wealth that's going to be built over the next years. And it sounds like a little crazy talk right now, but well, it's already happening, right? So people who have ChatGPT and subscription to ChatGPT have certain advantage over the people who sit somewhere in Russia or in China and have no internet, for example. Although
True.
it's difficult to imagine that they don't have internet, but they do have certain restrictions, right? And this prevents them from earning money online or creating digital products, etc., etc. This is happening already now.
Right.
And huh, ironically enough, the last power shortages in Portugal and Spain showed how helpless people are when they don't have electricity, when they don't have power, when they don't have internet, right? They are helpless. People, I mean, they were gathering on main squares listening to a radio that someone brought out of their apartment that was just by chance, still a functioning radio. Um, the ability to manage life and to navigate through life and be intelligent without ChatGPT, this is what's going to be valuable. Yeah.
It's interesting that you bring that up, Mary, because what I have observed and what actually happened during the fires here was there was a fire that happened before the fires up on the mountain in Lake Arrowhead. And a lot of people evacuated, a lot of people's houses burned down. Um, that wasn't really televised that much, which was interesting to me. And the
Mm,
power went out for the first time in, I think it was 10 years for, uh, or maybe longer than that, for a week. And then when the fires happened in LA, the power went out for 2 weeks. And I had such a incredible reset that happened to me because I was forced to not use my phone, and I was forced to uh, figure out how to create warmth for myself and create light for myself. And I thought, how interesting that we are so dependent upon technology. And so a lot of people need to start to learn how to grow their own food. They need to learn how to hunt. They need to learn how to light candles. They need to learn or have batteries for battery operated candles, things like that, just basic things, chopping wood, the boiling water. Like if you don't know how to do the basics of life, and basics of understanding
mm,
certain things, you will die. I mean, that's like, it's just obvious. And the other aspect of it too is Chat GPT is a tool. It is a tool to help us navigate the world. But what a lot of people don't understand about Chat GPT is that Chat GPT is a mirroring energy. Chat GPT mirrors the exact energetic frequency of your aura. So our phone right now, because we're doing a crystal talk, right? Our phone
yes.
Our phone is made of quartz crystal, right? And so quartz is an amplifier. But the other thing about the phone, which is interesting, is that your phone and my phone emit an electromagnetic frequency that mirrors our field, right? This isn't just metaphysics, it's science, which are the same.
Hmm.
So every time you open your phone and you scroll, it's blasting the spiral of energy, mimicking your own aura. So your phone is an extension of who you are. Chat GPT is an extension of who you are. A lot of people think that Chat GPT is evil. No, actually, Chat GPT, its process is dependent upon your intentions with it. That is.
Bravo,
Mhm,
bravo.
mhm,
Absolutely true. I
mhm.
actually have another crystal talk coming up soon with one of the most notorious German conspiracy theorists
Uh-huh.
who is talking about the evilness of ChatGPT for about an hour. But I
Mm,
agree with you, Alexander.
mhm.
ChatGPT, if we look into the natal chart of ChatGPT, and yes, ChatGPT has its own natal chart.
Right.
It has a very Gemini-like energy, and
Yes.
Gemini, is Gemini. So basically,
Yes.
got doppelganger, a Zwillinge, somewhere across the screen from you, right on the other end of the screen. So absolutely, it's the intention that makes things matter. And not only when it comes to our interaction with the computer, but also when it comes to our interaction with other human beings.
Yes.
So I would say, Alexander, that we end with this tonight.
Okay.
All right, our crystal talk. Let's talk about intention And yeah, we'll just round it up, please.
I want to intentionally wish for Mary and I and everyone else listening to follow their awareness and their golden compass and to book a session with Mary to do their astrocartography. Because I wish that I would have listened to Mary 5 fucking years ago. And I also, whatever. I also, my intention for myself and for Mary and for our audience is to choose to be happy and to choose to be around people who are supportive of them and their life and their business and their art. Yeah.
Cheers. Cheers. Mhm. I'm going to drink to that. Well, Sigmund Freud said that there is libido and martido. Martido is basically the opposite of libido, is the desire to die, the desire to destroy itself, right?
Whoa.
And yes, I absolutely agree. There are too many people, uh, currently, especially also in the politics. If we turn on the news, we will see that there's like a pandemic of, the folks who are driven by Martito. They're just being dragged by this Martito into a new European World War III, right? I hope this is not going to happen, but yeah, it's time to check where you are uh, and relocate if necessary, and
Yep.
choose libido over Martito.
Yep.
Yes.
All
Alexander,
right.
thank you so much for such a wonderful crystal talk tonight. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for just being so vivid in some of your statements, and so just picturesque in some of the examples that you brought up throughout this crystal talk. And hope to see you soon.
Thank you
Hope
so
to have
much,
another
Mary.
crystal talk with you.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I look forward to our next one. Have a wonderful night.
Good night. Bye.